Hi, my name is Mark Babson. I'm the host of this weekly radio program, which is sponsored by the nonprofit Salem for All. Salem for All seeks to make real and attainable the goals of hope, purpose, meaning, belonging, and achievement. We'd like to see ourselves in the tradition of great American social movements like Dorothy Day's Catholic Worker, Jane Addams' Hull House, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of 1960s Nashville. My guest today is Christopher Wicks. Christopher is a composer, organist, and pianist who lives in Silverton. He was awarded a master's degree in composition from the University of Montreal, a master's in organ performance from the University of Oregon. He also studied at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. Christopher's compositions have been performed at Harvard University and at the Juilliard School. To close this introduction, I'd like to make a tribute to writer and musician Richard Heinberg, senior fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute based in Corvallis. Dr. Heinberg passed away 2 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer. This is from a 2017 essay, which is called Post-Carbon Music. Material conditions change, then consciousness changes, and new art forms follow to express changed consciousness. I'd like to suggest 3 broad projects for musicians and other artists for the remains of this century. 1, preserve our culture's greatest achievements. 2, help society adapt. We've embarked on a century in which all the systems we have built since the start of the Industrial Revolution, our food system, our transport systems, our energy system, our building system, our financial system, and possibly our political and governance systems as well, will prove unsustainable. At the same time, the natural world will be shifting around us in unprecedented ways. Everything will be up for change, redesign, and negotiation. Society will need the services of artists as never before as we reweave the fabric of local community. And 3, do what artists always do, celebrate life's beauty. Thanks for joining me today, Christopher.
Thank you, Mark, for asking me onto this program.
Well, I like to start by asking people about their childhood. What was your childhood like, your early years?
I grew up in Silverton. I still live in the town where I grew up. I only left to try to be educated as well as that could work. We lived when I was a small child in this little tract of ranch houses near the edge of town. And I have a lot of happy memories of playing with my sister and with the other kids in these houses. I had 2 very loving parents, and I felt very protected and very loved. And I remember coming into Salem a few times per week for a preschool, which met in a church basement there. It was a cooperative run by the parents. And that was also a very calm and safe environment where I felt that children were respected and cared for. And a lot of the just very unhappy things that I read about and hear about happening to children, I'm very lucky because that didn't happen to me. Church was very important to my family. I remember that my parents wanted me to be baptized at a young age, but just old enough that I would remember it. So one of my very earliest memories was being baptized at our church in Silverton when I was 3 years old. I wanted to know what it meant. One of the adults tried to explain at all what was going on, but I had to go up in front of everyone, and I was sort of nervous. So I asked my sister what it meant, and she very earnestly explained to me that it would make me think better. And I wondered at the time whether it meant that it would make me intellectually smarter or whether it would make me morally better, or possibly both, because I remember thinking that it could be interpreted either way. But I decided that either way, whether it was one or the other or both, it was still a good thing to do. So then I wasn't afraid anymore. I thought that I could go in front of all these grown-up people and this intimidating, important pastor man and be baptized, and it would be okay. That's one of my earliest memories, a pretty happy one.
Were there other children there as well? And what was the church? What church were you involved with as a young?
It was Silverton United Methodist Church, and there were not other children being baptized that day. The only people being baptized that day were myself and my father, who came into church later in life. It was my mother who brought him into it. He was not raised in a church-going household. Actually, he was raised in a very ardently Marxist household, where social causes such as Marxism were really what they considered to be in the place of faith. It's more of a synthesis of left-wing politics and Christianity, or Christianity with that kind of emphasis that's his North Star now.
I like to ask people of my own generation, and you're a little younger than I am. As children, did they spend a lot of time outdoors? They have memories of connecting with the outdoor.
Oh, we did spend a lot of time outdoors. We played on the sidewalk, and we played like bouncing a ball against the garage door, and we played in the backyard, and we skinned our knees, and we rode our bikes around, and we just had a ball. And we go to our grandparents' house, and there was this kind of semi-vertical, semi-horizontal thing that was just dust, and we called it the clay bank, and we would get it wet, and we would play in the mud, and we would get filthy, and for some reason we just thought this was the greatest thing in the entire world. And the other neighbor kids would come, and they'd in my grandparents' neighborhood, and we didn't even know, and we would just all throw mud at each other, and it was just always a blast. It was wonderful. I hope kids still do things like that. I hope they're not just glued to their darn phones all the time.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah. Oh, that's terrific. And when we moved to Oregon in 1974, we moved to Ashland from Ottawa, and where it was very, very cold, and it was hard to be outside a lot of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So I was delighted to be able to be outside, and we had a small apartment, and I converted the back of it into a little mud hole that I played in every day. So I think of this, and you're
Oh yeah. Why is mud so much fun anyway? The French have an expression, yearning for the mud. And you say that someone is yearning for the mud if they're doing something that you think is beneath them. Like, why is he dating her?
Let's move to composing music. I think you're the only composer I know. I'm really curious about, the whole process of composition and what it means to be a composer.
Well, I was interested in it about as long as I can remember. One thing is, I started reading when I was 3, which I think is unusually young. I actually can't remember not being able to read, which I think is fairly unusual. And then my parents bought a piano at about the same age, so that my mother could resume the playing that she had done in lessons when she was a girl. And I was just fascinated by the piano, and I wanted to play it all the time. And pretty soon I was teaching myself to play the music that my mother was playing, but I would play just the right hand music, and it took both of my hands to do it. And I somehow taught myself how to read the treble clef. It took me to get lessons, and I started having lessons when I was 5. It took lessons to learn how to read the bass clef, but I somehow learned how to read the treble clef on my own. And I liked the idea of composing, so I would take staff paper and I would just cover it with musical symbols. I really liked the way that quarter rests looked and just different musical symbols. And then I'd give it to my mother and I'd say, "Can you play this?" And she'd say, "Well, Christopher, what you've done with these musical symbols, it doesn't really make any sense." And I wouldn't understand that. I think, well, maybe the piece is just too difficult. I didn't understand that what I had created wasn't really a piece of music. It was just a jumble of musical symbols. But then after I took piano lessons, I started to understand better about that. And I think it was when I was about 8 that I started producing these piano pieces that were actually original and were actually musically literate. And I remember being really jealous because I heard about Mozart and how he had produced musically literate pieces when he was 4 or 5. And I felt really outdone and super envious that someone had once done this at a younger age than I had. I was just mad about that. But I decided that I would maybe catch up as well as I could. So I started composing these little piano pieces when I was 8 and 9, like marches and polkas and waltzes and minuets and stuff like that. And I put together this suite of piano pieces. And all the while, for some reason, my piano teacher was really amazed that I was doing this, even though it seemed to me like the most obvious and natural thing in the entire world. So then there was something called the Oregon Music Teachers Association. Maybe it still exists. And they entered my piece in whatever my age division was. And I won for the state of Oregon as having written the best piece for kids that age, which I thought was kind of neat. I think maybe there was some money in it. And there was an adjudication where they gave some critique, and then they entered it for the Western United States, and it won 3rd place for the Western United States. So I thought that was pretty exciting. And so I guess my family decided that this was something worth fostering. And I guess really composing has been pretty much the center of my life and of my efforts ever since. I really can't think of a time when I've abandoned it for any serious length of time, or when I haven't really had that urge and really been focusing my efforts on it.
So you went from being sort of fascinated with the symbols and jotting them down, and then to, you said, writing things that were literate that somebody else could read. So do you remember becoming more fluent in having an idea and being able to notate it?
And I just remember playing lots of music on the piano for my lessons. And then I got to the point where somehow, I guess just from playing music and learning the correspondence between how music looked on the page and how it sounded, I got to the point where on my own, I figured out how to notate my ideas. And I'd work my ideas out at the keyboard and then I'd write them down. And I guess for my very first piano recital with lessons when I was 5 years old, there was a piece that I heard people singing. I think we sang it in school, but we had just been taught it by rote, but I notated it myself from what I had heard by ear. And that was the piece that I played for my piano recital when I was 5. So some people thought that I had composed it, but I actually hadn't. I had just taken it by dictation. But I had picked it out myself by ear and written it down. It was a song about like some sort of French folk song about birds. But anyway, so then I used to write my music by playing it at the keyboard and trying out all these sonorities and notating it at the keyboard. But then by the time I was an undergraduate at Eastman, I would actually just sit at a desk. I mean, I knew how it sounded, so I just notated at the desk and I wouldn't use the keyboard to compose. And now I just compose in these notebooks, these bound notebooks of staff paper that I buy blank. And I have my 2 favorite armchairs. So I sit in either armchair number 1 or armchair number 2, and I just compose directly into the notebook.
And you can do that for several instruments or for...
I can do it for like an orchestral piece. That's not a problem. But what I do like to do is then I notate it with computer notation, and then I have it play it back to me with like a synthesized simulation, so I can check for typos and really check and make sure that everything is lined up just so, and that there are no mistakes, that there's nothing that sounds off. Because I sometimes make typos when I'm doing the notation. Leave out a flat or a sharp marking here or there, or just something's not quite lined up just so. So there might be like a half dozen errors like that in a movement, and I need to make sure, get the bugs out, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. When I was in grade school, the local Salem Symphony came and played at my grade school, and that was very exciting. And then one kid in the audience got to come out and conduct. And I imagined that when you conducted, based on whatever movements you're making up there, people just watched you closely and they sort of, they knew what to play. I mean, I didn't realize that there was notated music in front of them or something like this. And so I was very curious what would happen when this kid, who I knew to be a screwball kid, would,
Mm-hmm.
without musical understanding. Anyway, and so I was very disappointed that, I thought, well, they're cheating. It's very mysterious to me, the process of writing and of transforming music into something that can be shared, passed down.
Well, most of composing, I have sort of all these like techniques and tricks that I use, and all this stuff that I've figured out works and doesn't work. Like, I'm not reinventing the wheel every time. And a lot of it is the voluntary work of my conscious mind, but I have to have some element of involuntary inspiration or I can't work. And it either comes to me or it doesn't. And it often comes to me like when I'm half awake, half asleep, maybe very early in the morning or very late at night. And there's like a 2-measure or so melodic idea, and it's just there. And I've just got to start. So I have to drop everything. And this is what I've learned that I have to do. Just drop everything and just start working. And then I'll like work for 5 or 6 hours without breaking it, without thinking of anything else. And I just spin the ideas out and I develop them and I flesh them out and write the other voices and write the other lines and make it all work. Make it all work, just sculpt it and just work with it and get my hands dirty and make it happen for however long it takes. And I hate breaking, working on a piece, taking breaks and having to go back to it or put it away and come back the next day. Often I'll compose an entire piece in 1 6 or 8 hour session. I just get really, I kind of obsessive about my work. I really like to do it all at once and not look back until it's done. And but there has to be like some element of that involuntary subconscious inspiration, even if it's just a little germ, a little seed that comes from somewhere else. And I don't know where it comes from. I would think, I've said before, I kind of waver into how religious I am formally, but if the Holy Spirit exists and if the Holy Spirit is active in my life, I would like to think that those ideas come from the Holy Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit at work in my life. Those little seeds that come from somewhere from some invisible world that I just don't know how to explain. I composed a string quartet, probably about a 20-minute string quartet, the other night, and then I kept waking up in the night and working on it, and then I finished it the next morning. And just now I was downstairs and I was looking at it and going over it, and I was like, oops, there's a parallelism I don't like. Oops, there's a little dissonance that isn't worked out just so. So I was tweaking it. I was tweaking these details. And I was more in control now than I was in sort of the frenzy of writing it. So I was able to notice these details and clean it up a little. It's like, I actually don't drink at all, but there's a saying from one of the great authors, I can't remember who, that you should write tipsy and edit sober. And I don't literally do anything tipsy, but I think when I'm in creation, I'm a little bit kind of drunk on creation. And so I need to go back later when I'm in a more measured, level-headed frame of mind and check the details and get some bugs out.
What are some important influences or models, would you say, in your writing?
Well, that is a very interesting question. When I was a student, I composed in a lot of different styles. I composed a fair amount of music for a while that was dodecaphonic. It was strict 12-tone music, like the technique that Arnold Schoenberg came up with in 1923. And that's kind of controversial, but it's also, when I was a student, it was still quite prestigious. And I even went like a step farther with hexachordal combinatoriality and array. I guess I did some things with arrays. I did some of that stuff, some of that integral serialist stuff that was prestigious at the time. I also studied the theories and the compositional exercises of the Swiss-American composer Paul Hindemith, who lived from 1896 to 1963. And that's much less alienating music. That's much more conciliatory music. He taught at the Conservatory in Zurich and later at Yale and produced a bunch of composers who all composed exactly as he did because he was very dogmatic. And in recent times, though, I've revisited his music, and it doesn't sound much like mine at all. And I actually find it kind of off-putting. So I'm not sure where I was when I was working like that. So to me, my music just sounds like my music, and it doesn't sound like anybody else's. So I asked some composer friends of mine who they would say my influences were. But I said to this composer friend of mine, whose music does my music sound like to you? And he said my music sounds like an English composer from around World War I. In particular, like Gustav Holst, who's most famous for his orchestral suite, The Planets. And there's some hymn tunes that have been derived from that suite. And he mentioned in particular one somewhat obscure English composer from that era named George Butterworth, who died fighting in World War I at the age of 31. And that's part of why he's obscure. He would have produced a lot more music if he hadn't died fighting in the war. Anyway, that's who my composer colleagues say I compose like an English composer from the teens, the 19-teens.
What do you like to play? What kind of keyboard music do you enjoy playing?
Well, lately I've been recording so many of my pieces. I've been holding 2 or 3 recording sessions a week at my church and recording pieces of my own exclusively, either solo pieces or piano or organ or pieces for violin or trombone or whatever with piano accompaniment. So I've been practicing so much of my own music, I'm hardly playing anything else. But I really enjoy Bach, especially. And I also enjoy, on the organ, the so-called North German school, which was sort of the school that led up to Bach. All these, well, Northern German composers who were very active in the Lutheran Church at that time. And I like to play Debussy at the piano. I really enjoy Debussy. I would enjoy Ravel, but a lot of Ravel's music is too difficult for me. He just composed a notch higher on the difficulty scale than Debussy, and it's just enough that it's beyond my reach. And let's see, Bartok. Bartok is fun. I enjoy his 6 dances in Bulgarian rhythm. They're just wild. And the Shostakovich Preludes and Fugues on the piano. At the organ, I used to enjoy playing a lot of music by Olivier Messiaen, but my organ technique, as I've grown older and my health has declined, isn't what it used to be. And I think a lot of Messiaen would be too difficult for me now.
What do you hear when you look at a score?
Well, I'm an okay score reader. I can usually, I mean, I can tell what a piece sounds like by looking at it, especially if I had a hand in creating the piece. I'm not great at looking at a transposed orchestral score and figuring out all the transpositions. I used to have more skill at that because it was a skill I had to master to pass my exams to become a fellow of the American Guild of Organists. We had to do a lot of, we had to play at sight a score that was written in all of these different clefs, including some out-of-date clefs that really aren't used anymore. 4 different clefs at once on an open score. But so I was better at transpositions then. But rarely, I can't usually summon all that much excitement just from looking at a score. I can usually assess, though, whether I will like a piece from looking at it. And for example, when I'm asked to give advice to a student, I can help them and identify what some of their technical issues might be, if it's an idiomatic writing for instruments or orchestration or notation issues. But for me, pieces of music really become what they are when we give them the concrete and the specific life of being played, and of coming to life in the instrument or the voice. And it's so interesting to understand how pieces of music really become, in actuality, the same score can become more than one different thing as it comes to life in different contexts and different performances. When it's performed in a different place with a different ambiance, be something quite different.
Interesting. Can I stop you there for a moment? Yes. I don't like to hear recordings very much because I get attached to them too much. So I would rather look at a score, look at something or have an idea of how to start and then make some decisions on my own, I guess. Not unconsciously follow some other pattern.
Right. And something I've been thinking about lately is how different the recorded experience can be from the live experience. But I guess I think one can make too much out of that. I'm wary of listening to recordings too, because I don't want to be following too much someone else's interpretation. I want to make I want to make sure that essential aspects of what the composer wrote are guiding my interpretation, but maybe as much as possible otherwise is my take, my unique take.
Do you have a listener or an audience in mind as you're composing?
Well, I hope that this doesn't sound terribly selfish, but I really am myself the audience for whom I am most composing. My goal is to compose music which meets my own standards and accomplishes what I am setting out to do, and I can't quite put into words what those goals are. But when the music sounds a certain way, then I know that those goals have been met. And that seems to be when other people are satisfied too. But in a way, you can't get inside other people's heads. You don't really know what they're experiencing. I've often felt that life itself is a game of solitaire in so many ways. And if we're not satisfying ourselves, we really can't satisfy anyone else. And music is very, very much like that. Music, I think, especially the life of a composer, is so very much a game of solitaire. The extreme example, the extreme metaphor I would use for a composer's life is like the anchorites and the anchoresses in medieval Europe who would agree to be literally walled up alive in a chamber as part of a church, and they would have a little window through which some food would be put and Holy Communion, and other than that, they were walled up there, and they were just there until they died. And then their bones would decay, and they would they'd have a little book that they would do spiritual reflections in, and they'd talk through a little hole to some spiritual advisor, and they'd maybe give spiritual counsel. but it was just a completely solitary, reflective, hermetic existence forever. I think that's an interesting model for the life that composers live, and surprisingly apt. And in its severity and austerity, strangely, it hits the nail right on the head. I think young composers should be warned. To a very real extent, that's exactly what you're signing up for. If you can't be in that little chamber, walled up alive, making yourself happy with what you are composing, making yourself happy with nothing but what you put on that page and what you hear in your head when you put it down on that page, if that's not enough for you, then you are not ready for this life.
Wow.
And I told that to my parents the other day, and they were absolutely horrified. But I really don't think that I'm exaggerating. And I think every composer I know who was at Eastman along with me, whether they would openly admit it or not, or consider it too sacred to openly admit, they would agree with me that that is the life that we signed up for. We agreed to be walled up alive with our staff paper and our pens.
One doesn't justify one's actions with words. It's more, as you say, a feeling, or like, is this what's meant to be? Can you speak to that?
Well, I would say that this is something I can't put into words, but the music seems to speak for and justify itself. My life is an endless cycle of self-surpassing in terms of, I hope, ever greater refinement and expansion of my compositional practice and ideas. This discipline is inherently life-giving to me, and so I hope that it gives a life to those with whom it comes into contact when it gets outside of my little cell, especially the performers who play my music. Ultimately, it's me in the night and what I put on paper. And yes, it is life-giving, and what we composers choose is to shut everything out and be alone with that.
Well, is there something you'd like to say in closing?
I guess I would say that it's really important. I remember the opera King Priam by Sir Michael Tippett. It was summed up, it was very influential to me when I was an adolescent, and part of it was summed up as, let us never turn our inner ear away from our soul's lips. I'll repeat that. Let us never turn our inner ear away from our soul's lips. It's so important to listen deeply to what your intuition and your soul are really saying to you. And once you've heard that message, once you've heard that, that still small voice, you have to persevere and you have to follow your dreams, even when it seems that the world doesn't understand, and even when it seems that there might be something impractical, or if you wonder if things can work out. And if you can make a discipline of giving concrete and specific form to what you envision, to prioritizing it and giving yourself over to it every day, even when, despite obstacles, to refusing to let what might seem like crazy fantasies be crazy or fantastical. If you insist on giving them that concrete and specific form, on birthing it into reality, then there are things that might have seemed too good to be true, but they can become your reality. And I'd say that just the other day, I finished composing my opus 1062, the 1062nd composition of my adult life. By the grace of God, or by the alignment of the stars, or by the sweat of my own brow, or this happened for me. So I just have to say that I'm grateful for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. And I also want to say you're a terrific violinist, so thank you for playing my music. It's meant a lot to me.